And hey folks, me again, back again with another video for y'all today. I'm going to be reacting to samurai history. And yes, I have affinity for samurai history and culture, so hope you enjoy. Like, subscribe, follow me on TikTok and Discord, and let's begin.
They were the knights of medieval Japan, an elite warrior class that held the reins of power for more than 700
Thousands
years.
of years.
Masters of the sword and blade, guided by an unforgiving code of ethics, they proved ferocious in combat. They beat back foreign invaders and fought each other for land, status, honor, and power. Their legacy of martial artistry and self-discipline persists even today. They were the samurai.
If you're gonna watch this, take it with a grain of salt. Sorry for shaking my camera, folks.
It's a typical training day at the Takeda School of Mounted Archery in Kamakura, Japan. Students on this practice course are keeping alive a warrior tradition that dates back over 1,300 years. It is called Yabusame, and it is a ceremonial and sacred form of mounted archery. Established in the 7th century as a way to pray for peace and prosperity across the land, Yabusame is still performed primarily at religious festivals and for visiting dignitaries. During each Yabusame event, archers, clothed in the hunting attire of medieval warriors, race their horses one at a time down the length of a narrow 200-yard course. Along the way, they shoot at a series of 3 targets, spaced at 70-yard intervals. Arrows that hit the mark are considered good luck charms. Shiro Iyataka Kaneko is the 35th master of the Takeda.
Or sensei.
It takes about 3 years to be able to perform Yabusame for the first time. Well, the most talented ones have been practicing for 10 to 15 years.
The key to successful Yabusame technique is the unique shape of the saddle stirrups that brace a rider's feet. They're really more like platforms than stirrups, but nothing less would do.
A rider keeps all of his weight on his feet, not on the saddle. This way, his legs absorb the
Steady says
upper
aiming.
body of the horse, and it keeps his aim stable.
Today,
I personally have shot a crossbow, but a live bow, that's a different story.
But it was once a common skill and the preferred method of fighting for an elite class of Japanese warriors known as samurai. The precise origins of the samurai are shrouded in mystery and speculation, and much of what we know of them has been handed down not as fact, but as legend and lore. What is certain, however, is that roughly 1,000 years ago they emerged in a form much like the knights of medieval England. They were warriors who served regional lords and earned land and favor through valor in combat.
In the medieval period, that was no problem, but when the 1600s came around, basically samurai became ronin or merchants or poets, bureaucrats, if you will.
Initially, samurai warriors fought as armor-clad mounted archers. Over time, their fighting methods evolved to include combat on foot, using swords of supreme quality, long wooden pole weapons called pikes and naginatas, and even matchlock muskets.
That was the only time Japan was actually open
Their attitudes were entwined
to foreign
with
influence.
Japan's native Shinto religion. Eventually, they would also adopt a stringent code of behavior that would stress devout loyalty, stern self-discipline, and the zealous defense of personal honor. The code would also demand a particularly gruesome form of ritual suicide as a means to preserve one's honor in the face of defeat. The samurai class would come to dominate Japan, and and over the course of their 700-year history, their values would shape the political and social framework of the country, leaving an indelible impact on the Japanese national identity. Japan is roughly the size of the state of California. Its total landmass consists of 4 main islands, surrounded by hundreds of smaller ones. Its first inhabitants are thought to have migrated from China and other parts of the Asian
Yeah, you could say
mainland
China
between
made
30,000
Japan.
and 12,000 BC. By 300 AD, some inhabitants had developed rice farming and established long-term settlements in the Yamato Plain, a fertile area in the southwestern portion of Honshu, Japan's main island.
Some of
This
these even
permanent
traded
settlement
rice.
gave birth to a political state based on military might and taxation paid in the form of rice.
Rice is a labor-intensive way of getting food out of the ground. And it's also a way of getting food out of the ground that makes you very committed to a place. If you're doing slash and burn agriculture, you can up and move. If you're building an elaborate irrigation system and then growing rice on it, you've put years of labor into a spot and you need to farm it for years to get the value of your labor back. And this makes it very easy to tax people. They're less inclined to up and run away.
Groups of extended families called clans began to struggle for dominance of the Yamato Plain. Small armies soon formed, supported largely by taxes collected from farmers. The history of this period is vague, but eventually one group, who took its name from the area in which it lived, made the right combination of strategic alliances to come out on top, the Yamato clan. They rose to dominance sometime in the 6th century. The Yamatos declared their successive leaders emperors, and supported this move by also claiming divine origin. Their empire gradually widened as they conquered territories in neighboring regions of Honshu. Perhaps the most well-known figure from this family was a bigger-than-life warrior named
Yamato can come to you!
better known as
Prince Yamato! And the one thing I want to point out, the straight sword's used for thrusting instead of slashing, so over time, the Japanese ditched the straight sword for more of the curved sword.
Prince Yamato's fearless and daring behavior, mythical or not, became an archetype for future Japanese warriors.
In the middle of the 7th century, these so-called emperors had accumulated enough power, enough control over at least the central parts of the main Japanese island in order to impose a political reform.
In this reform, the imperial family set up a central government with a palace and a court of nobles, councilors, and government administrators at the site of present-day Kyoto. To provide the nobles with income, imperial lands were divided and distributed among them. Income came from taxes, usually in the form of rice, paid by peasant farmers who worked the lands. But it was the responsibility of the nobles themselves to protect their lands and collect taxes. This could be especially difficult if a nobleman's property lay hundreds of miles from Kyoto.
And you have to worry about bandits.
You have to form kind of a private army to make sure that the peasants are properly taxed and that you receive your income. Otherwise, there may be robbers on the way, there are famines, and there
Or
are robbers
bandits.
on the way that attack these convoys and they steal all the rice. That is your income.
Manpower for these private armies was often drawn from warrior families living on the edges of the empire. Most were of noble descent. As the noble families in Kyoto had grown in size, many of the younger sons had been forced to the empire's boundaries to conquer new lands for themselves. These men fought from horseback, using the bow and arrow as their primary weapon, and frontier life had made them tough as nails. They became a sort of rural police force for the nobles in Kyoto, and were ultimately dubbed samurai, meaning one who serves. In exchange for their services, they demanded parcels of land. This was the true beginning of the samurai tradition.
The more they were in demand, these warriors, the more powerful they became, Why? Because they also have to be paid in land. There was no money, right? And so sometimes the official in Kyoto had to divide his land from which he drew his income into half. One half would be his income, the other half would go for payment of the warriors who secure your whole area militarily.
By the 10th and 11th centuries, the heads of some samurai families controlled huge tracts of land and had become powerful warlords in command of vast armies of warriors. They battled each other for dominance, and it was only a matter of time before one of these strong leaders would attempt to brush the imperial family aside and seize the throne for himself. For coming generations, this grab for power would shape the samurai. Miura Hiroichi restores historical samurai armor. Just like the knights of medieval Europe, samurai wore suits of protective plating to deflect arrows and sword slashes. Miura is one of a handful of highly skilled artisans sought out by museum curators to restore early suits of armor that are now considered national treasures.
Or collections.
Wealthy patrons also commissioned him to replicate famous pieces for their personal collections.
This is how armor from the medieval period was born. This is the fully armored
Helmet,
samurai
bow,
that you-
sleeve shields, the sword.
The helmet, sleeve shields, lower armor, sword, bow, and arrow quiver.
If I ever had,
And here's an attendant wearing an
if I ever
abbreviated version of
had like a
the
PS4 Pro and went out and bought Ghost of Tsushima, I would have customized my character as like a
The helmet,
full-blown samurai.
usually wasn't made of metal like its European equivalent. Instead, it was made of dense sections of leather, layered for added strength, and covered in lacquer to protect them from the humid Japanese climate. The leather section is called kozane.
But the one thing I want to point out is nobody knows if the Japanese did have a half bow or not.
Constructing one suit of armor took a
Predating the
large
Native
amount of
Americans.
250 yards, and it took about
I don't know if
3
that's
billion
historically
pieces of metal
accurate or not.
and a lot of materials.
Because samurai armor was made of leather, it was relatively lightweight and flexible, ideal for use on horseback and in hand-to-hand fighting.
It wasn't just for fighting on the battlefield. There was a Japanese sense of beauty in it. It was made beautiful. It's been said by many that the armor was a costume to die in. But actually, Japanese armor was a costume to be worn in the celebration parade after victory in the war. That's my belief.
By the late 12th century, such wartime victories had come most often to a legendary clan of samurai warriors named Minamoto. For years, the Minamoto had served as a sort of enforcement arm of the imperial court. As other samurai clans in remote regions had amassed significant power, their leaders oftentimes had grown resentful of government authority. Some clans had actually risen in rebellion, and one samurai leader had even attempted to establish a parallel empire of his own. In many of these cases, the imperial court had sent the strong and loyal Minamoto family to bring the rebels into line. Over the years, this potent family produced some renowned samurai figures. One of the most famous was Minamoto Tametomo. Tametomo is considered possibly the greatest archer in samurai history.
He's supposed to have been a giant, well over 6 feet tall. His left arm is supposed to have
Bigger than the
6
other.
inches longer than his right arm, which means that he's got an unusual
Very long bow draw.
Indeed, legend has it that he once sank an enemy boat with a single shot. In 1156, the reigning Japanese emperor died, and a deadly rift developed within the imperial family regarding which male heir would ascend to the throne. Warriors from leading samurai families fought for both factions. When the dust settled, Minamoto Tametomo found himself on the losing side. The victors exiled him to a remote island and later sent forces by boat to kill him. In a token act of defiance, Tametomo fired arrows from shore at the boats of his approaching attackers. The last arrow struck one of the boats near the waterline, penetrated the wooden hull, and sank the vessel. Still, with many more boats closing in, Tametomo knew his fate was sealed. Determined not to die at the hands of his enemies, he left the shore and took his own life,
To preserve
and
his
he did it
honor.
in a particularly gruesome manner. Tametomo committed harakiri, which literally means belly cutting. He plunged a blade into one side of his abdomen, sliced across, and then made a second cut from top to bottom, virtually ensuring a slow, agonizing death. The act was so incredibly painful and took such courage to perform, it was a way for him to prove that he was taking his own life to save his honor, not simply out of cowardice. But Tametomo was not the first warrior to take his own life in this way. His name is the first associated with the extreme act. In later centuries, harakiri, also known as seppuku, would become commonplace among defeated samurai and would evolve into a complex ritual governed by many rules. It would even include a second participant armed with a sword. This so-called second would automatically behead the dying man to shorten his suffering.
There are some people who believe there are only three proper ways to cut. One would be one horizontal line, in which case the second would probably be heading. The second would be two crossing lines. Well, again, everything would be in the lower abdomen. The third would be three horizontal lines, the third being the most difficult. If you imagine cutting across and pulling up, cutting across again and pulling up, cutting across back this way. And that might be enough for a man just to die, just to expire there.
A lot of theories as to why this particular form of suicide becomes popular. Japanese language and Japanese culture has a lot of expressions dealing with the belly as the kind of center of emotions and such. The same way that English speaks of somebody with a big heart or a black heart, Japanese will speak of someone with a big belly or a black belly. And so there may be something to the idea of ripping your belly open and saying, see, it's not black.
In the years following Tametomo's death, his nephew, Yoritomo, led the Minamoto clan to a position of supreme military power in Japan. In 1192, the emperor dubbed Yoritomo Shogun, an ancient title given to generals before the time of the samurai, who were sent out to subdue barbarians at the edges of the empire. The title had always been a temporary one, but Yoritomo would make it permanent. As Japan's ultimate military leader, Yoritomo exercised more practical and administrative power than the imperial court itself. Eventually, the state of affairs in Japan became similar to the one found in England today, in which the royal sovereign is merely a figurehead, and the parliamentary prime minister actually runs things. To escape court politics in Kyoto, Yoritomo set up a parallel government run by samurai in Kamakura, just south of modern-day Tokyo. But this shogun-led government, or shogunate, never pushed the emperor aside completely. There was really no alternative.
The emperors were not really seen as having political authority. The emperors were more seen as the high priest of the country. You could compare the emperors to a certain extent with the popes of Europe. I mean, you can go and kill a king, but to kill a pope is a problem, because he's the source of authority, religious authority, and the political leadership needed that religious authority, without which they couldn't rule.
Despite Minamoto Yoritomo's grand successes, peace in Japan would
Never
not
last.
as an old samurai adage wisely cautioned,
After victory, tighten your helmet cords.
Feuding among clans would continue, and another threat, one that was not
The Mongols,
loomed on
not the biker gang. The actual Mongols from Mongolia.
In the year
See that joke
1274,
there?
the people of Japan faced a grave threat from mainland Asia. The ferocious Mongol regime that had conquered Korea and China.
See,
over the
that's what
last
Ghost of
century was,
Tsushima
again,
said in
looking to
during the
expand
Mongol
its empire.
invasion of Japan.
Its leader, the legendary Kublai Khan, wrote to the Japanese emperor informing him that the Mongols expected to receive tributes and taxes from Japan. Khan received no response. Enraged, the Mongol ruler dispatched a fleet of warships to teach the obstinate provincials a lesson.
It's the only time between the early 500s and the 20th century that Japan was invaded by a foreign power, and one of only 2 times that the Japanese warriors actually fought a foreign enemy.
Anyway, folks, I'm gonna leave the video right here. So I hope you enjoy. Like, subscribe, follow me on Amino, TikTok, and Discord. God bless y'all. And I'll see you next video.